Oh my god, guys, it's finally here. No, this is not it. This is the EOS R, but the EOS R3 has finally landed. Canon has finally made the announcement, and you know, I was really excited about this camera, more so than the EOS R5. And luckily, thankfully, I was one of the very first few people in Malaysia to actually try and touch the EOS R3. We were actually shooting a promo video for Canon Malaysia about the R3 when it landed at their doorstep in the middle of when we were shooting. We all stopped just to go and try it out, and that's what this video is going to be all about. It's a rather in-depth hands-on look at the EOS R3. However, I do want to say a few things, and that is I did not manage to go and take this camera out. Obviously, you know, we were all embargoed within the area, so I couldn't get any proper test images, but I hope to borrow the camera and hopefully get more proper video and photo sample images. So this is only going to be a physical look at the camera. We're going to be looking at the ergonomics, the overall physical buttons on the camera. We're going to be looking at the specs of photos and of videos. There are some really interesting things that Canon did not mention to hype up the camera, which I'm personally very excited about. So let's not waste any more time. Let's jump straight into the in-depth look at the EOS R3. So, okay, wait, let me check. Focus, yep. Okay, so we're going to be talking about, obviously I don't actually have the camera, I couldn't take it home, but we're going to be looking at the ergonomics, how the camera feels, the photo and the video side. So if you want to skip to any portion, you can just follow the chapters below. But so we're first going to be looking at the physical aspects of the EOS R3. And if you didn't know, all these cameras, especially when it comes to embargo, they come in this nondescript white boxes. So I don't actually know the full packaging, but I think this should be close to final packaging. Just the front box only has the designs, because underneath the boxes you have like the battery chargers and things like that. So the first thing you notice when you take out the R3 is honestly how freaking light it is. It's amazing how much Canon was able to cut down, and obviously it shows in the size that I'll show you later. The grip actually has this really nice more like a very modern looking textured feel to it. It's a lot grippier than the R5 for sure, and the EOS R, which is one of my biggest gripes of the camera actually. These rubber grips here are a little bit too smooth, so you don't actually have a solid grip on it, but the R3 solves that. Let's first look at the front portion of the camera. Obviously it has what you would expect from a full body camera. It has the two buttons on the side as well as on the vertical grip, which are customizable to a few certain functions. Obviously it's not going to be 100% customizable to any button, but it's the same on the 1DX Mark III. Obviously one thing that's great about this is that if you're coming from like a 1DX2 or 3, these uses the LPE19 batteries. But we're going to be first looking at the back of the camera, and as you can see at the back of the camera, you will notice a few things. Obviously, number one, it has that smart controller. The other thing you'll notice is that finally it has the switch to change between photo and video with just a change of a button. The other things that I didn't like about the R and the R5 is that to change between photo and video, you actually had to do a double press. So you have to press the mode button, then press info to change the video. It's a bit of a pain in the ass, and I prefer just a physical switch to just quickly change it. And the other thing you'll notice is that the record button on the EOS R3 is a lot bigger and beefier than the 1DX Mark III, which I'll show you later. So now we're going to be looking at the port side. So as normal, obviously you have the headphone and you have the microphone jack, you have the PC sync flash, you also have an Ethernet cable. And the one thing, this is going to be my biggest disappointment of the camera, is that it is unfortunately micro HDMI. I'm not really sure why Canon decided to go with micro HDMI. Considering the size of the camera, they can definitely put in mini HDMI. Micro HDMI is just a pain in the ass. It has a higher chance of breaking compared to mini or full-size HDMI, which this is probably my biggest disappointment with the camera. I really didn't like how they chose this. Now quickly, I do want to look at the multifunction hotshoe. Now this is a new thing that Canon is introducing in the Canon EOS R3. I unfortunately don't know what it actually does. Canon did not actually provide any sort of accessory to go with this. Maybe they might announce this, because I'm recording this obviously before the launch date, so they might introduce like some new accessory or things like that. But chances are maybe they won't, because I haven't heard any rumors about it. It's like a normal Canon hot shoe, just like this, but it's just that it has that connection points at the bottom. I still think that you can use your current accessories with the R3. It's just that there are probably going to be new accessories for the R3 for the multifunction hot shoe. So now, really quickly, I do want to look at a quick difference between the 1DX Mark III and the EOS R3, and I'll show you why I'm so excited about this. Number one, as you can see from the size alone, it's like that one chunk of that, like that body on top of the 1DX, it's not there. So that means that it's a lot easier to put into bags. The problem with the 1DX Mark III is it's not the size, it's not the width, it's actually the height. That one notch, or like that one big thing on its head, it's actually a pain in the ass to put in a lot of bags, and it actually pushes up on a lot of bags. And I'm so glad Canon managed to like shave it off. It just makes the R3 a lot more compact and easy to carry on in different kinds of bags. As you can see on the side, the one thing, obviously the 1DX used to have your card slots on the rear of the camera, but now the R3 is on the side. As you can see also, the size difference is really big. And on the back, obviously you can see Canon decided to go away with that bottom LCD screen on the 1DX. I'm not so sure who uses this. I'm thinking if you are like a real photojournalist or sports shooter, you might use it. But for me, it's not really that helpful. And also, obviously, it has finally that flip screen on the EOS R3. But other than that, as you can see, the record button on the 1DX Mark III is so small compared to the R3, and that's what I really love. The problem I had with the 1DX Mark III is that sometimes I would actually mispress because the button is almost flush with the body, so I mispress sometimes. But with the R3, it's really protruded, so that it's much easier for you to press, and I don't think you ever miss a shot. Finally, for you shooters who use like Canon's Wi-Fi transmitter, you will notice that the R3 doesn't actually have a slot for it. So this tells me that the R3, obviously, as Canon mentions, this is not like the flagship. The 1DX Mark III is still there for that high-speed transfer in terms of Wi-Fi, but you do have GPS built into the camera of the R3, and I'll show you that a little bit later. And looking at the top, as you can see, the buttons on the 1DX Mark III, there are more buttons, and I like this because you have dedicated buttons to changing your ISO, your white balance, exposure comp, and things like that. I don't like that you have to use the multifunction button on the R3 to change like white balance and ISO, because you have to press multiple times on the same button. I'd rather have a dedicated button. They had space, but I guess Canon decided not to do it. And the button placement on the many of the M function button is a little bit awkward, and I don't like it. It's all the same on all these R cameras. I just don't like it because the way you have to put your finger is a little bit off for me personally. So physically, I just want to wrap up the ergonomics and the whole physical aspect of the R3. It is, as I said before, extremely light, and that is the one thing that you would definitely notice coming from like the 1DX Mark III or the 1DX Mark II. It is extremely nice to hold in your hand, which is a huge surprise because all mirrorless cameras to me feel like crap. But this is the first mirrorless camera that I actually really enjoy. The grip is really nice and grippy, so you feel very confident when you're holding it. And last thing that I do want to say is that viewfinder. Oh my god, the viewfinder on this, as you can see, compared to the 1DX Mark III, it protrudes a lot, but it is there obviously to accommodate that sensor to detect your eye, and it is an amazing feature. I'll talk about it a little bit later in the photo side, but the size of the viewfinder is incredible because, as you can see, I wear pretty big glasses. It's just so much easier to see on that bigger viewfinder as compared to like stuff like the R or the R5. Really love that. So now we're going to be looking at the photo specs, and we're going through the menu, and there are some really interesting things that I do want to point out to you guys about this. So first things first, a little bit specs out of the way. I don't actually have the full spec sheet from this right now as of recording this, but I can confirm that it is a 24 megapixel camera, and I can show you. You can look on the back of the screen. If I change the raw functions of it, you can actually see it's a 24 megapixel sensor. It is a 24 megapixel stacked BSI sensor. I don't actually know what it actually means. From what I understand, it does give cleaner readouts and things like that, but I think Canon will explain it a little bit better than I can because I have no idea this technical stuff. But as we can go along, as you can see, one thing that I've noticed is that it doesn't have the face detect option in the quick menu. I'm not really sure why, because these are all the main focusing modes. I think you might have to customize 1, 2, 3 and 4, but I didn't get time to actually try it. The enable part is to enable the tracking, and the tracking, you can actually do 3 kinds of tracking. You can actually do people, you can do animals, and the new one, obviously, it's going to be motorsports or vehicles in general. So I was really interested to try it out. So just want to go through the whole menu system for photos first. And as you can see, there is obviously the JPEG and HEIF. But something I do want to highlight is this HF anti-flicker shooting. I'm not so sure what HF, if I'm not mistaken, it would mean high refresh rate. I have no idea, but this high HF anti-flicker shooting is really interesting, and what it does, it actually scans, or it actually allows you to fine-tune your shutter speed. Now this is going to come in handy when you're shooting in really bad flicker environments, when the lighting is just not right, or if you're shooting in electronic shutter, you are going to introduce some banding into your shots, and this is where this HF anti-flicker shooting actually helps, because you can fine-tune to like 180 point something or 25 point something. And also what you can actually do is you can actually click auto detect settings, and the camera will actually detect the scene. Obviously you have to keep your camera steady at this point, but it will detect the scene and it will suggest the right shutter speed for you. It could be a full number, it could be a decimal point number, it doesn't really matter, but it's pretty interesting. And from what I've seen from the back of the screen, it does actually help out, and it's also available for video, and I'll show you that a little bit later. And as normal, we're just going through, it has the exact same thing that you would notice in every other Canon camera. One thing that I do like about this is it's also available in the R5 is this interval timer. Now you don't need an external intervalometer. You can actually have the timer built in. This was not a feature that was available in my 1DX Mark III. I was so angry, but I'm so glad the R3 does it right now, so you can just do your own time lapse without actually needing an external intervalometer. Another thing that was pretty interesting that I noticed was this display simulation, or specifically OVF simulation view assist. I didn't manage to test this out, but I'm curious as to see what OVF actually means. From what I understand, it means optical viewfinder, but what optical viewfinder are we seeing? What simulation view assistant are we seeing? It says that it's to provide a natural view when taking photos, but I can't really see any difference. I think it will help more when you're shooting outside, so unfortunately I can't really give a comment about this just yet. So let's move on to autofocusing, and as you can see from this, there is the traditional, if you're using any of the new R cameras, there's no like that face detection, and I think this is to accommodate the fact that there are 3 different kinds of focusing types or subject tracking that you can use. All the way to the end of the focusing types, you obviously have that whole area, which I think it's going to be the one that you're going to be using if you want to use like specific tracking for people, animals or cars. But other than that, you have like the normal like single point, then the expanded area and things like that. Surprisingly, the eye control AF is not located in the AF tab. It's actually going to be located in the yellow tab, which I'll show you a bit later. But we're going to go to it now. Everything else, the network settings, is all things that most of us don't really care about, obviously, but you can see GPS settings. You can actually set GPS in the camera itself. So let's move to the wrench icon. This is where your overall like settings for the camera. Obviously it's just the same, it has everything that you will normally have on every other Canon camera, but obviously the first thing that I want to go to is the eye control AF. Now this is the feature that Canon was very interested in sharing about. It's obviously Canon's first digital camera that has eye control AF. Now unfortunately I cannot actually show you how it works, because unfortunately when you're putting it on an external display, you cannot see the viewfinder. I'm not so sure why. Maybe it was a setting that I didn't set, but I spent like a good 10 minutes trying to find it, but you can't actually output the display onto an external or through the HDMI, especially when you're in the viewfinder. So you gotta take my word for it, and I'll do my best to describe it as much as I can. So the eye control AF, you have to actually turn it on. Okay, future Sam here. I actually described it a little bit wrong. I'm going to try my best to do it correctly now. So the first thing you realize is that when you turn on eye control F, you realize how terrible it is. This is because you actually have to calibrate the viewfinder to your light surroundings. Now, I think what a lot of people thought is that the camera might calibrate it to your eye, but no, it actually calibrates it to lighting conditions. So what the camera suggests you do is that you always calibrate it to different kinds of lighting scenarios, and I think this is ideal because depending on where you are, artificial light, daylight, and things like that, so that the sensor will be a lot more accurate when it's tracking where you are looking. So the way you're going to calibrate it is you just start calibration, and if you played any of those FPS games where you have to look up, look down, look left, look right, that's how you do it. So basically there will be like some dots here. It'll ask you to look up and hold down the multifunction button, and once that's done, it'll go back down, go left and right. That is basically how it calibrates the viewfinder or the sensor to your eye, and you do it obviously in multiple different shooting scenarios. And the next thing is how you actually use it. Now this is the one thing that I was a little bit worried about, and that is if every time I'm going to look, is it going to suddenly change my autofocus or things like that. There is this thing called a reticule. Well, it's not really called a reticule, it's a pointer display. There are two kinds of designs, you can actually change it. So the way it works is that when you are looking at a specific part of the viewfinder, assuming this is your viewfinder, the pointer is actually going to point at one point, or wherever you look at, here, let's say it's here, and then when you half press your shutter button, it's actually going to take your actual focus point, which is not the same as this, your actual focus point, and when you half press it, it's going to move it here. But let's say you suddenly looked here while the focus point is here, it's not actually going to move the focus point until you half press again. So this was one of my biggest concerns, is that if you were on continuous AF, would this suddenly change to over here if you're looking, and it doesn't work that way, as I mentioned before. So once you look to this side, the pointer is actually going to go to this part of the frame, and when you half press, then only the autofocus point will change. If you do it here, you point, you look at this here, half press, and then it goes there. Half press, then it goes there. So it's always going to be following this pointer, but it's not actually going to physically change your AF position until you actually half press to tell the camera to do so. So I think this is a much better way than suddenly just changing your autofocus points all over the area, because if you're suddenly looking around at different parts of your frame, there are different subjects, you don't want your AF point to suddenly change. So I think this is a good compromise. And it's actually a very useful and quite intuitive way of focusing, and I'm really interested to see how this will actually pan out in real life. Well, other than that, it's going to be the exact same thing. All the menu systems is going to be the exact same as what you see on every other Canon camera. So now let's move over to the video side and see what we can do. But first things first is let's look at the resolutions and what it can actually shoot at. Obviously, we know it can shoot 4K, 4K DCI, all that. It can't shoot 8K. It can also shoot at 4K 120 as well as Full HD 120. And unlike the 1DX Mark III or the R5, to actually enable RAW shooting, you do need to click a separate menu function to enable what you're shooting, either MP4 or RAW. So what this means is I think you cannot shoot proxies. You can shoot raw light obviously, It shoots RAW up to 60p, that's amazing. But I don't think you can shoot proxies to the other card, or at least I haven't been able to test it out entirely. As you can see, it also has that HF anti-flicker shooting, but it does allow you to shoot in this HF anti-flicker, which is going to help you fine-tune your shutter speed. Really helpful, and I can't wait to actually use it, especially with 120 in artificial lighting like tungsten or fluorescent bulbs. Pain in the ass to shoot under those lightings, but this is definitely going to help out. So now let's look at Canon log, and obviously, as we know, it shoots Canon log 3, but surprisingly Canon actually chose to remove the original C-Log option, so you can't actually match your legacy cameras like the 5D Mark IV or C100, C100 Mark II. There's no C-Log 2, which is a bit of a bummer as well, but I think this sensor does not have enough dynamic range to actually shoot C-Log 2, unlike the C70 that's shooting me right now. C-Log 2 is an amazing color profile, it's amazing log setting. I really love shooting with it. There is this really interesting auto power off temp, which tells me that chances are this camera is prone to overheating. Once again, I cannot confirm this because I have not tested it out yet, but from what I understand from the R5 is that it had that limit with 8K, or it had that limit with, you know, the overheating, because if it was too hot, it would probably damage the camera sensor or damage the camera, and I think this is what the R3 has as well. Cannot confirm if it overheats, but I will test it out once I get the camera. Something really interesting that I did not expect this is that this camera has timecode inside. Timecode, I mean, it's obviously meant for like bigger productions. I'm not so sure why they will put timecode in and have micro HDMI, not really sure. But timecode is definitely going to be really helpful for people who mix cameras and are shooting on bigger productions. It's easy to sync up all the way in post and things like that. So it's honestly pretty incredible that they actually chose to put timecode inside this camera. So let's move now to AF, and obviously AF is going to be just the same as photo mode. You do have that subject tracking inside people, animals, motorsports, cars. So that's all inside here. Eye detection is also there, but it's, once again, the menu system is just like normal, just like every other one. We're gonna cut to something that I was a little bit surprised by, and that is you cannot, at least from what I can see, you cannot use eye control AF in video, which is I can understand why, but at the same time, like, I would have loved to see it there. I'm not really sure why Canon decided to omit this. I think it maybe comes down to like the usability aspects of it. Eye control AF does feel like it's a little bit more focused to photos, and might not be so applicable to video. But then, you know, the feature is there. I wish it was there, but I mean, I'm not really going to be using much like autofocus on this camera much. I still prefer manual focusing, and if I'm going to manual focus, I would manual focus with the screen rather than the viewfinder. So it's not there, so what can we do? So there's something that I want to add on this that I found that was pretty interesting, and it's going to be for people who don't really shoot video on this camera. I know a lot of people say like, why does Canon focus on video? I don't really shoot video, I only shoot photo. There is this setting in this camera where you can actually change the dial when you are, so normally what you would do is you would switch, if you switch the dial at the top, you can either do photo or video, but if you don't do video, you don't want to do video at all, so you can actually change it to, if you flip the switch, you can change it to silent shutter mode or electronic shutter mode. So this is going to be helpful for people who want to shoot mechanical and then you want to quickly switch to silent shutter but you don't shoot video, or if let's say that project only requires you to shoot photo, you can just flick a button, flick the dial, and you can go into silent mode. One thing I do want to note is that I did not see any menu function to control the hotshoe or like that multifunction hotshoe at the top. I think because this firmware is not final, and probably Canon will most likely introduce a firmware update once they have equipment or once they have accessories that use that multifunction hotshoe. As of now, I can't see any in the menu system to actually change anything, which means that I think Canon's not going to introduce anything at least at the launch of the R3. But you know, it's cool that it's there, and I'm really excited to see what Canon brings to the table. So yeah, as you can see, it's a pretty interesting camera, and there are a lot of things that Canon obviously didn't mention because they are like highlight specs they only want to focus on. I do want to talk a little bit about the things I like and I don't like. The first thing that I really like about this camera is obviously going to be that shutter speed correction for flickering. I think that's a really interesting. If I'm not mistaken, the very first few cameras to have it were the Panasonic GH series called SynchroScan. I really enjoyed using that, where you can really dial and fine-tune your shutter speed, and I'm so glad that it currently exists on the R3 as well. The other thing is I obviously like the big size body, the large size body. I'm so glad that Canon decided to embrace the large body design of like the 1D series. I don't like the modern or mirrorless cameras in general because the feeling of the camera is it doesn't feel right in my hands, and I really like that big beefy body to get like a proper grip. The other thing that I really like, obviously, it's going to be that eye control autofocus. It felt like a gimmick when I first heard about it, but when you put it in practice, it's actually really usable. Now, I do want to talk about a few things that I don't really like, and number one is going to be the card slots. I don't like that it takes both CF Express and SD. I would rather that it takes both CF Express just to make it easier for me personally to match my card, so that I'm not bogged down by, like, you know, slow write speeds or read speeds on the SD UHS2. Something else that I don't really like about the camera is obviously the lack of buttons on the top part. If you look at my 1DX Mark III, you know, there are a lot of buttons, physical buttons to change your ISO, white balance, and things like that. The R3 has, I think, about 3, if I'm not mistaken, from just what I can remember. 3 buttons, which I think is not enough to make it, you know, to make you move fast. I know you have the multifunction button, but you're going to press it multiple times to change your white balance, change your ISO, and things like that. I'd rather have like a slew of buttons on the top rather than like limiting a few, but I understand it's probably the design choice and things like that. Obviously, the last thing is going to be that micro HDMI. That to me is a huge letdown for the camera, mainly because it was also focused as a video camera. Micro HDMIs are notorious for breaking. You know, they're so tiny, and especially if you have a rigid cable or if you're not too careful on set, it can be a disaster to even get fixed, which I'm not really sure why Canon went with like the micro HDMI cable, and probably that's going to be my biggest disappointment. I don't really have much to say because this isn't really a review. I only had a short hands-on with it, so I would like to be able to test it out a little bit more to give a lot of my honest opinions. I have already pre-ordered the camera, which is coming in November, which is a shame, but you know, we all do what we can. Really excited to try and test it out. If you have any questions about this camera that I did not cover in this video, please leave me a message or drop me a comment. I will be more than happy to try and test it out and answer your questions once I can get the camera. Thank you guys so much for watching once again. I know it looks like I'm really excited about the camera, and I really am. I'm really excited to be getting my hands on a brand new camera, especially something like this that has a lot of the features and workflows that can help me do my job a lot better as a photographer and filmmaker. And that's why I really like about new gear, especially gear that pushes certain boundaries, not in terms of specs but in terms of usability. And I think that's what the R3 really does. It balances out that new mirrorless technology with the more traditional bigger size bodies and the benefits that come with that sort of size of body. So yeah, really excited. Once again, thank you so much. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps out the channel a lot. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you when this is no longer an R, when this is an R3 in my hands.